Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 6 college football predictions. So last week, I had a record of 13-3, and that brings my record on the season to 82-15. But kicking things off this week with the game we have on Friday, and that is West Virginia at BYU. So BYU, they've been good so far this season as they're 4-0, and West Virginia hasn't exactly been great as they're 2-3. And they're coming off back-to-back blowout losses against Kansas and Utah. And in those losses for West Virginia, their defense has been terrible, and that has been a common thing for them this season, as they're allowing 26.6 points per game on the season. And they also try to slow down a good BYU offense, as they're scoring 38.5 points per game. So that is going to be tough for West Virginia, and it's also going to be tough for them to try to keep up, because this West Virginia offense is not good, scoring just 22 points per game, and they face a BYU defense that's allowing under 10 per game. But I don't really think this game is that close. BYU is the clear better team on both sides of the ball. I think they dominate and win 45-7. Moving to the games on Saturday, beginning with Kentucky at Georgia. So Georgia's looking for a bounce-back win after they lost their first game of the season in their loss to Alabama last week. And I think Georgia's got a good chance to bounce back, because Kentucky isn't very good sitting at 2-2. But Georgia's offense has been pretty good this season, scoring 34.5 points per game, and they've been great on the ground, with over 200 rushing yards per game. And I think the Georgia offense is going to continue to play well, as they face a Kentucky defense that is not very good, allowing 26 points per game, and they're not good against the run. Now, the offense for Kentucky isn't terrible, but they're not very good either. They're scoring 27 points per game, and their passing offense is pretty bad. But the Kentucky offense, they match up against a Georgia defense that is allowing 19 points per game. But I have Georgia getting the win here. I think they're the much better team. They're at home, and Georgia, they've also owned Kentucky, winning the last 15 meetings. So I've got Georgia with the win very easily, 38-14. Moving on, we have Iowa State at Cincinnati. So this is an interesting game. Iowa State's been good so far as they're undefeated at 5-0, and Cincinnati's also been solid as they're sitting at 3-1. And they're coming off a nice win over Kansas last week. But this game should be pretty close, and these are two pretty similar teams, as both these teams have been great defensively so far this season. As Cincinnati, they're allowing 18 points per game, and Iowa State, they're allowing 14 points per game. But with the Iowa State defense allowing a little bit less, their offense is also scoring a little bit less, as Iowa State putting up 32 points per game compared to Cincinnati's 40 per game. But this is a game that could really go either way, and despite this being an unranked team versus an undefeated team, Cincinnati is actually the favorite here, and an upset is definitely possible. But I'm going to take Iowa State to get the win. I just think they're the better overall team. I think their defense is a little bit better, and also trust their offense to put up more points against another tough defense. So I'm going to take Iowa State with the win in a close, low-scoring game, 23-16, but an upset is definitely possible. Moving on, we have Wisconsin at Maryland. So Wisconsin, they've been pretty disappointing so far this season as they're 2-2, and they've lost back-to-back games, and neither of them have been particularly close. And then they'll face a Michigan team that is 3-1, and coming off a bye. But a big part of the struggles this season for Wisconsin has been their offense, as they're scoring just 20.8 points per game, and I don't see them doing much this week against a good Michigan defense that has allowing just 17.8 points per game. Now, on the offensive side for Michigan, they've been pretty good. They're scoring 35 points per game, and they run the ball extremely effectively, as they're averaging 253 rushing yards per game, and running back Justice Haynes is 6th in the country with 537 rushing yards. But the Michigan offense, they face a Wisconsin defense that isn't that bad. They're allowing 18.8 points per game, and they're actually the best defense against the run, allowing just 50 rushing yards per game. And they've also been able to stop some good teams on the ground, as they held Alabama to just 77 rushing yards. But that is definitely the path to victory for Wisconsin this week. They have to completely shut down this Michigan run game and force Bryce Underwood to beat them as a passer, although that's definitely possible because Wisconsin pass defense isn't very good. But there's potential for an upset here. I'm not going to predict it to happen because I think Michigan is just the better overall team. And I don't think Wisconsin's offense is going to do enough against tough defense, but an upset is definitely a possibility, but I've got Michigan with the win fairly easily, 27-9. Up next, we have Illinois at Purdue. So Illinois is coming off a nice bounce-back win after their loss to Indiana, and they beat USC last week by a score of 34-32. And then I faced a Purdue team that's not great, but also isn't terrible, as they're 2-2. But the offense for Purdue has been pretty good, as they're scoring 28 points per game, and they've thrown the ball really well, averaging 280 passing yards per game. And I could see Purdue having some offensive success against an Illinois defense that is allowing 23.4 points per game, and they haven't been too great against the pass, allowing 242 passing yards per game. Now, on the other side, the Illinois offense is also good, scoring 35 points a game, and I think they'll continue to play well against a bad Purdue defense that is allowing 26.5 points a game. But this is a game that might be a little bit closer than some people think, especially if Purdue can score and throw the ball effectively. But in the end, I think Illinois is the better team. I think they'll get the win here. I do think this game could be surprisingly close, but I do have Illinois with the win, 34-24. Moving on, we have Texas at Florida. So this is another really interesting game. Texas, they're 3-1, although they haven't really been that impressive so far this season. And Florida, they're 1-3, and they've been very disappointing. But this is a big opportunity for Florida to potentially get an upset win, and it's a big chance for Billy Napier to potentially extend his job by a few weeks. Although, if this is an ugly loss for Florida, this could be Billy Napier's final game. But despite these teams having very different records, they're actually very similar, as both these teams are great defensively and have been very underwhelming offensively. But the defenses have been great, as Texas, they're second in the country, allowing 7.8 points per game, and Florida, they're allowing 16 points per game. And then offensively, Texas, they haven't been terrible, they just haven't been quite as good as you would expect, as they're scoring 31.8 points per game, and they're running the ball effectively with 200 rushing yards per game, although Arch Manning has not lived up to preseason expectations. And then the Florida offense, they've just been terrible all around, as they're scoring just 22 points per game, and their quarterback's also been disappointing, as DJ Wagway has more interceptions than touchdowns. But because both these teams are great defensively and not great offensively, I do think this is going to be a very low-scoring game, and I definitely think that gives Florida their best chance to win. But there's a real possibility for the upset here, especially with Florida being at home, but I'm still going to take Texas to get the win. Their offense has at least looked halfway decent this year compared to Florida's offense, which has been completely dysfunctional. Plus, I think Texas has the better defense, so I do have Texas getting the win in a low-scoring game 20-13, but an upset is definitely a possibility. Up next, we have Virginia at Louisville. So this is another game that should be pretty good, as we have a Virginia team that's 4-1 and coming off a big win over Florida State, against a Louisville team that has also gotten off to a good start, as they're 4-0. But this game should be pretty entertaining. The offense for Virginia was great last week with 46 points, and their offense has been great all year long, scoring 45.6 points per game on the season. And Virginia, they've also been great through the air and on the ground, with about 300 passing yards per game and 250 rushing yards per game. But the Virginia offense, they match up against a Louisville defense that has done a pretty good job this year, allowing 18.8 points per game, and they've been pretty solid against both the pass and the run. Now, on the flip side, the Louisville offense has also been good, as they're scoring 38.3 points per game, and they've thrown the ball really effectively behind quarterback Miller Moss, as he's had back-to-back 300-yard games. And I think Miller Moss and this Louisville offense is going to have another great game, because this Virginia defense is not very good, as they're allowing 23.2 points per game, although that is even worse because half the teams they've played have not been good offensively. But I think this is going to be a fun, high-scoring, entertaining game, but I've got Louisville getting the win. I think their offense is a little bit better, their defense is a little bit better, plus they're at home, and I've got Louisville in a shootout, 38-28. Up next, we have Vanderbilt at Alabama. This is another great game we have this week. Vanderbilt, they're 5-0, and they face an Alabama team that's 3-1, and coming off a big win over Georgia. And this is the exact same situation we saw last year. Alabama, they had just beaten Georgia, and then they play Vanderbilt. The only difference is this time Vanderbilt is actually expected to be good, and they're a top 25 team. But this game should be pretty good, and we have a great matchup. On the offensive side of the ball for Alabama, they're scoring 38 points per game, and they've been great throwing the ball, with an average of 321 passing yards a game, which ranks 10th in the country. But the Alabama offense, they match up against a good Vanderbilt defense, that is allowing 17.2 points per game on the season, and they've done a really good job against the pass, allowing under 200 passing yards per game. Then on the offensive side of the ball for Vanderbilt, they've been great, and they actually have better numbers than Alabama, although the competition they've played hasn't been as good. Although Vanderbilt, they're scoring 49 points per game, and they've been great through the air and on the ground, with 271 passing yards a game and 223 rushing yards a game. And they match up against an Alabama defense that is allowing 16.5 points a game, and just 113 passing yards per game, although they have been hurt on the ground, allowing 160 rushing yards a game. But this game is going to be really good, and a game I could really see going either way. Now, before I really dug into the numbers for this game, I was pretty sure I was going to take Alabama, but now I'm not so sure. Because I do think Vanderbilt is going to be able to run the football, I think they're going to be able to score some points, and I think their defense is good enough to contain Alabama's offense. But Even with all that said, I'm still going to take Alabama. I just think they're the better overall team. I don't think they're to underestimate Vanderbilt this time around, and they're also at home. So I've got Alabama in an entertaining game, 27-24. Moving on, we have Boise State at Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is back up to 500 on the season, as they're now 2-2 after a dominant win over Arkansas, 56-13. And then I face a Boise State team that's 3-1. And Boise State, they've kind of been written off by some people after they lost to South Florida to open the season, but I still think this is a pretty good team. And I think this is going to be a pretty entertaining game, as we should see a lot of points scored. The offense for Notre Dame, they've been great, as they scored 56 points in back-to-back games, and on the season, they're averaging 44 points per game. And I think they're going to continue to play well against a Boise State defense that hasn't been playing too well, allowing 25 points per game. And they're also not good against the run, so I think running backs Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are going to continue to put up huge numbers for Notre Dame. And those two have actually combined for 12 touchdowns over their last two games. Now, on the flip side, the Boise State offense has been pretty good, as they're scoring 38.5 points per game and passing for about 300 yards per game. And I could see them having some success against the Notre Dame defense that hasn't been playing that well to start the year, allowing 27.8 points per game and 268 passing yards per game. Although Notre Dame, they did hold a good Arkansas offense to 13 last week, and I think that could be the start of them building something positive defensively. But I think this is going to be a similar game to last week's game for Notre Dame. I think their offense is going to continue to play well. I think their defense is only going to get better as the season progresses. And yeah, I think it's going to be a lot like last week's game. I do think it'll be a little bit closer, but I think Notre Dame wins this game pretty easily by a score of 45-17. Up next, we have Penn State at UCLA. So Penn State, they're looking for a bounce-back win after they lost to Oregon last week, and I think they should be able to get that win, because they face an awful UCLA team that's sitting at 0-4. And UCLA hasn't even led at any point in any of their games yet this season. That is like impressively bad stuff. But I don't really have a ton to say about this game. UCLA is one of the worst teams in college football. Penn State, they win this game easily 42-3. Next game, we have Kent State at Oklahoma. This is another game that's probably not going to be very close. Oklahoma, they've been great, sitting at 4-0, and Kent State is not good, as they're 1-3. Although, something to note, Oklahoma will be without starting quarterback John Mateer, but I really just don't think that's going to make a huge difference in this game, because they face a Kent State defense that is second worst in all college football, allowing 44 points per game. And the Kent State offense isn't much better, putting up just 18 points per game. But this game's not going to be very close. There's no chance Kent State keeps up with how much Oklahoma's going to score in this game. Oklahoma wins big, 56-6. Next game, we have Texas Tech at Houston. This game could be interesting. Texas Tech is 4-0 and coming off a bye after their big win over Utah, and Houston's been playing pretty well to start the season as they're 4-0. And this game could be pretty good. Offensively for Texas Tech, they've been one of the best teams in the country, putting up 52 points per game, which ranks second nationally. But they face a Houston defense that's been playing pretty well, giving up just 13 points per game. Now, on the flip side, the Houston offense has been solid, scoring 31 points per game, but they face a really good Texas Tech defense that is allowing just 11.3 points per game. And Texas Tech, they've got one of the best defensive fronts in all of college football. But this game where there's potential for an upset, but I don't think it happens. Texas Tech is just way too good. Their offense is definitely going to score enough against a good defense, and I just don't think Houston does a ton offensively with how good this Texas defensive front is. But I've got Texas Tech with the win pretty easily, 34-10. Next game, we have Minnesota at Ohio State. So Ohio State, they're 4-0 and coming off a solid win over Washington, and Minnesota's been okay as they're 3-1. On the offensive side of the ball for Ohio State, they've been playing well, scoring 36.3 points per game. Although they play a solid Minnesota defense, allowing 16 per game. Now, on the offensive side for Minnesota, they've also been solid, scoring 33.5 points a game, although they match up against the best scoring defense in the country, as Ohio State is allowing 5 points per game. But I really don't have a ton to say about this game. Ohio State, better team, they're at home. I think they win this game pretty easily, 35-7. Moving on, we have Miami at Florida State. This game should be pretty good, as we have Miami, who's a top 5 team, and they're 4-0, against a Florida State team that's 3-1. And this game could have been a top 10 matchup if Florida State wasn't upset by Virginia last week. Although, even though this isn't a top 10 matchup, this still should be a pretty good game. But on the offensive side of the ball for Miami, they've been good at scoring about 37 points per game. And they've been good through the air and on the ground, with 270 passing yards per game and 180 rushing yards per game. And they match up against a Florida State defense that has allowed 19 points per game, and they're good against both the pass and the run, although they really struggled last week, allowing 46 points, and they were not good against the run, allowing over 200 rushing yards. Now, on the offensive side of the ball for Florida State, they're actually leading the country in scoring with 53 points per game, and they have an elite run game. They're second in the country with 336 rushing yards per game. But the Florida State offense, they get a really tough test this week as they face a Miami defense that's played really well, allowing 11.5 points per game. And this Miami defense is also great against the run, allowing about 75 rushing yards per game. And they still haven't even allowed an opposing team to get to 100 total rushing yards in a game. That is pretty impressive. But I think this game really comes down to Florida State can run the football. I think if they can run the ball, I think they're going to be able to put up some points. I think that could be trouble for Miami. But if Florida State can't really run the football, then that puts a lot of pressure on quarterback Thomas Castellanos. And while I do think he's good, I don't think he's good enough to win this game strictly as a passer for Florida State. But this is a game that can definitely go either way. I do think Miami's going to control the line of scrimmage as they've done all year long. I think they're going to run the football well, control the Florida State run game, and I do think that's going to lead Miami to the win. And I've got Miami remaining undefeated by a score of 27-20. But this game could definitely go either way. And our final game, we've got Texas A&M hosting Mississippi State. This is another pretty good game we have this week. Mississippi State is coming off their first loss of the season as they lost a close one to Tennessee in overtime. And then they'll travel to Texas A&M, and they face an A&M team that's 4-0. Although, Texas A&M wasn't too impressive last week, beating Auburn just 16-10. But this game should be pretty good. On the offensive side of the ball for Texas A&M, they've been great, scoring 35.8 points per game, and they've thrown the ball really well, with about 300 passing yards per game. Plus, they really got the run game going last week, as Le'Veon Moss ran for 138 yards. But the Texas A&M offense, they face a Mississippi State defense that has played pretty well, allowing 17.6 points per game, and they've been great against the pass, although not too good against the run, allowing 170 passing yards per game and 135 rushing yards per game. Then on the flip side, the Mississippi State offense has also been good, as they're scoring 38.6 points per game, and they've run the ball really effectively with over 200 rushing yards per game. And they face a Texas A&M defense that is pretty solid, but they've given up some points, allowing 24 per game. But this is going to be a pretty good game, and this is a game that can definitely go either way. I wouldn't be shocked to see Mississippi State with the upset. But I'm going to take Texas A&M to get the win. I think they're the better overall team, and they're at home at night. If Mississippi State was at home here, I think the upset is a lot more likely, but I just don't think Mississippi State goes into Kyle Field and comes out with the win. So because of that, I've got Texas A&M at the win, 32-21. But not an upset, not totally out of the question. But those are my Week 6 college football predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. Be sure to check out the community tab of my channel, where you guys can vote on who you think will win some of this week's big games. But that's all for this video. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.